This speech by Lydia X. Brown was originally given at the 28th Annual Colorado Youth Diversity Conference on January 31st, 2021. The conference was organized by Youth Celebrate Diversity and presented by RBC Wealth Management, with support from Boeing, Cherry Creek Schools, and Colorado State University. We're excited to welcome to the virtual stage our Sunday keynote speaker, Lydia X. Brown. Lydia X. Brown, they, them, is a disability justice advocate, organizer, educator, attorney, strategist, and writer whose work has largely focused on violence against multiply marginalized disabled people, especially institutionalization, incarceration, and policing. They've worked to advance transformative change through organizing in the streets, writing legislation, conducting anti-ableism workshops, testifying at regulatory and policy hearings, and disrupting institutional complacency everywhere from the academy to state agencies and the nonprofit industrial complex. Lydia co-leads the project on disability rights and algorithmic fairness at the Institute for Technology, Law, and Policy at Georgetown University Law Center, and teaches for Georgetown University's Disability Studies program. In collaboration with others, Lydia is co-editor and visionary behind All the Weight of Our Dreams, the first ever anthology of writings and artwork by autistic people of color and otherwise negatively racialized autistic people. They've been honored by the White House, Washington Peace Center, National Council on Independent Living, Disability Policy Consortium of Massachusetts, National Association for Law Placement / Public Service Jobs Directory, Society for Disability Studies, and American Association of People with Disabilities. Lydia graduated from Northeastern University School of Law as a public interest law scholar. Please join us in welcoming Lydia.
Good afternoon. This is Lydia, sign name L. Brown. I'm an East Asian young person with short black hair and glasses. I'm sitting in a room that has 2 windows with blinds behind me and a plant that probably needs help because I am not a genius at plants. I want to open with an invitation and an invocation to each of you. An invitation to you to use the space that you are in to feel as comfortable as possible for you, for your body, for your mind, for the needs that you carry with you to this space. So often we are expected to believe that there is only one right way to exist in a space, to show respect, to be engaged, even in allegedly progressive or even in supposedly radical spaces. And I don't believe in that. I believe that expectations of the ways that our body minds are supposed to look, the ways that our body minds are supposed to move, the ways that our body minds are supposed to appear in space, that those expectations are rooted in racism, in classism, in ableism, in gender-based oppression, in so many ways that we enact violence on one another systematically, as well as interpersonally. And so my invitation is for you to breathe, to pause, to be, to consider what has brought you into this space today after the 2 days of this conference, after a year of a pandemic, after years and years of constant onslaught of racism and class oppression and ableism and messages that tell us that we are broken, that we are wrong, that we are burdensome, that we are defective, that this is an opportunity for us to listen to our body minds instead. This is an opportunity for us to give ourselves permission to take up space, literally, to inhabit our body minds and the world that we are in. This is an invitation for us to consider what our body mind desperately needs for us to know, to understand about what it craves, what it needs, what it desires. This is an invitation for us to ask what it is that we have carried with us now. Have you had something to eat or drink in the last couple hours? If not, you should go get something right now. I have peach juice, peach nectar, so that I can hydrate my own body. What do you need in this space? What do you need in the room you are in? Would you prefer to be on a couch or a beanbag chair or a bed, or if it's habitable outside? Here it is not habitable outside. There's a lot of snow happening and I would not recommend that. What have you carried with you? Have you brought with you your anger, your rage, your righteous indignation? Have you carried with you your grief, your mourning, your sorrow? Have you carried with you your despair, exhaustion, bone weariness? Have you carried with you your annoyance, your frustration, your trauma? Have you carried with you the weight of others' expectations, requirements, beliefs, anxieties, tensions, or fears? Have you carried with you your gratitude, your joy, your appreciation, your eager anticipation? What have you carried into this space with you? What needs does your body mind have? This is an affirmation that our body minds have needs and those needs deserve to be met. This is a reminder that for those of us who cannot currently access the resources or the support that we need to meet our needs, that is not a commentary on our worth or our value, that does not mean that we are broken or wrong or undeserving, but rather it is a reminder that you deserve so much better, that you deserve everything. And for those who do have the resources to access what you need, this is a reminder that you deserve those needs to be met now, that you deserve to be held and witnessed with love and care. The work that I do is rooted in a practice of disability justice, which encompasses work across the neurodiversity movements, affirming that all of our minds are valuable, that our brains are not wrong or bad. It encompasses work across the disability rights and the Mad Pride movements, asserting that disability rights are civil and human rights, that disabled people deserve to live, that madness does not necessarily mean that we are wrong, that we are dangerous, that we need to be wiped out or eliminated, but that we deserve to be as we are, that we deserve to receive the support that we need and want, and that we deserve to be cared for not despite who and what we are. Disability justice reminds us to honor our bodies and minds, to honor the bodies and minds of those around us, and to honor our own. Disability justice is an inherently intersectional practice, one that teaches us that our struggles are all rooted in interlocking and interconnected systems of oppression, that the same forms of oppression that tell us that if you are poor, it's because you're lazy or irresponsible, that if you are a person of color, you only experience racism because you choose to be a victim, that if you are a woman, that you only experience oppression because you've exaggerated it and you've hyperbolized it, or that if you are disabled, you only experience challenges because you haven't tried hard enough, that those ideas are all rooted in much more insidious and dangerous values about our lives, about our bodies, about our minds. And a lot of people don't really understand where I come from, don't really understand the work that I'm doing, right? And they will say things like, well, Lydia, that's all good that you want to support disabled people, but who really hates disabled people? Who has a problem with disabled people? Nobody that I know has any issues with disabled people. Maybe some people are a little bit bigoted or a little bit ignorant sometimes, but who actually hates disabled people? Who oppresses disabled people? And the reality is that ableist oppression, systemic, structural, or institutional power differences between people whose bodies and brains are considered healthy, strong, sane, and intelligent, and people whose bodies and brains are instead considered sick, weak, crazy, or dumb, actually inflect every part of society. Ableism is rooted in white supremacy. Ableism is rooted in settler colonialism. Ableism is rooted in gender oppression. Ableism is rooted in anti-queer and anti-trans violence. Ableism is rooted in environmental injustice and capitalism. Ableism is predicated upon a value system that teaches us whose body minds are valuable, worthy, and desirable, and whose body minds are expendable and disposable. Ableism teaches us that we have to prove that we earn personhood, that we have to deserve to be treated like a human being, that our body minds have to conform to normative expectations of whiteness, of wealth privilege, of gender performance, of masculinity, and of ability, that we have to prove that we are intelligent, prove that we are strong, prove that we are healthy. And that if we cannot prove those things, then we are the problem, we are the burden. And we see this throughout history. Throughout United States history that embedded ableism into our immigration laws as to who would be allowed to immigrate into the country, that embedded ableism as the logic behind the workhouses where poor people would be confined, ableism behind the growth of mass criminalization and mass incarceration as a new form of chattel enslavement and social control over the reproductive capacities and social participation of Black, Brown, Native, Asian, and other people of color, of people who are immigrating, of people of minority faith, of queer and trans people, of all of us who have existed at the margins of the margins, the belief simultaneously that we need to be protected for our own good by being controlled, but at the same time that we are dangerous and threatening, and that all of those ideas rooted in ableism have always affected those of us at the margins of the margins the worst. When I was in high school, your age, I was falsely accused of planning a school shooting. I was falsely accused of planning a school shooting because, as a young person who was coded as feminine, who is East Asian, and who was known to be autistic, the fact that I had interests that were not considered gender and age appropriate meant that I must be violent, that I must be obsessed with violence in a scary, terrifying, and threatening way. If I was a little white boy, probably would not have gotten the same response. Even if I was a little white girl, it might have been a little bit of, we're a little bit worried about this, is a little bit concerning, but probably would not have had the same response that I actually experienced. By the time I was in college, I found myself repeatedly denied requests for the most basic forms of accommodation, not necessarily because of overt hatred, but because of the other side of ableism. The fact that ableism teaches us fear and shame, that ableism teaches us that if disability is this awful, terrible, bad thing, then we should be ashamed of the idea that we might become disabled, that we might be disabled, and that if disability is a source of shame, then disability needs not to exist in public, in our schools, in our colleges, in our communities. That to talk about disability means admitting weakness. That to talk about disability is somehow adopting the colonizer's narrative. That talking about disability is somehow accepting other people's definition of our lives. When disabled people, especially Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian disabled people, queer and trans disabled people, we have always already known what it takes for us and for our communities to survive. We have always already known that the work of justice, the work of freedom, is the work of love and access and care. Because if we cannot practice love for one another, then what are we even here for? Dr. Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public. If justice is what love looks like in public, then disability justice teaches us how to actually care for one another. Disability justice teaches us how we can fight for all of our needs to be met, how we can reject the politics of false scarcity that says that if some people seem to get rights or freedom, then other people must be losing rights or freedom. That tell us that if some people appear to be gaining something societally or culturally, then somebody else must be losing it. Disability justice is a politic of solidarity that teaches us that if our struggles are intertwined, that teaches us that if our histories have been so deeply interconnected everywhere, from genocide to eugenics, to our immigration laws, to literally labeling political dissidents and liberation movement workers as mentally ill simply for trying to fight for freedom, then therefore our freedom is connected to that solidarity is not an option, but a necessity. Solidarity is not something that we can hope to achieve perhaps one day, but it is something that is a prerequisite in order for us to move to the society that we deserve. And disability justice does affirm that we deserve a better world and a better society than the one that we have now. Disability justice affirms that we deserve to be valued for who we are, not despite who we are. Disability justice affirms that it is unconscionable, that it is unjust and inhumane and unsustainable to expect that in the midst of a now year-long pandemic, we somehow have to be expected to perform, to achieve, to succeed, to excel academically, to get the right grades, have the right GPA, take rigorous enough classes, apply to the right colleges or programs, get the right scholarships, have the right leadership opportunities on our resumes, perform, do, achieve, work. And that if we do not do those things sufficiently, then we have somehow fallen short, that we are inadequate or insufficient. Well, let me tell you something else about me. When I was in college, I graduated with a 2.8 GPA in the bottom 8% of my class rankings. When I went to law school afterward, I joke like that because law school was a truly terrible experience. Side note, separate conversation. When I went to law school, we didn't have grades technically, but if we did, my GPA equivalent would have been a 2.2.
It looks like the connection died for a minute. I'm back on a different computer, so hopefully that works instead. This is Lydia. I was saying that when I was in law school, by the time I made it there, we didn't have grades. They didn't give us a GPA in a traditional sense. But what I would have graduated with would have been a 2.2 GPA instead. And I think that I turned out fine because my grades did not define my value, my worth, or my intelligence. My grades did not reflect just how hard I worked. They also reflected the fact that I had to survive untold amounts of trauma, of abuse, of harassment in and outside of school, related and unrelated to school. And despite that, I succeeded enough to get C's, a lot of C's. And I am proud of those C's that I obtained. So I want to share that with you because you might be here now, part of this conference, part of this gathering, right? And you're thinking about your grades and what your expectations are, right? You're thinking about what you have to do to prove that you deserve to be treated as a human being. And nobody should ever have to prove that. Nobody should ever have to say, I need to earn the right to be treated like a human being. No matter what our brains are like, our bodies are like, what our gender is like, how we experience ourselves, we don't have to explain ourselves to anyone. And you don't have to understand everybody else's experiences in order to believe and fight for everyone's right to be treated as a human being and everyone's right to experience what justice feels like, to taste what freedom would be like on our tongues, in our breath, in our lungs. Disability justice is an offering to us of the world that might be, of the world to come, of the world that we deserve, that we may not yet live for, because we are in this for the long haul. But the world that we must never stop fighting for and demanding so that those who come after us do not have to live through the same forces of violence and oppression that have marked our lives, our skin, our bones, down to our DNA. That those who come after us might have a conversation where talking about racism or settler or colonialism or ableism is talking about history. We are not there yet. We are not remotely close to being there. But I dream fervently that with all of us committed to doing that work and to staying in it, that we will be closer to a world in which disability justice is simply a way of being. Thank you.